This is the Master's Harvest, video number 2, Second Esdras Overview. Today is January 10, 2024. I'm your host, Daniel Berglund. When I became a believer in 1993, I found myself drawn to prophecy. It's been more than 30 years now, and I'm still drawn to prophecy. In 2019, God led me to read the books of the Apocrypha, in particular 2nd Esdras, and specifically chapters 11, 12, and 13. I found myself faced with an amazing prophecy that's in the process of being fulfilled to this day. The big news is this: Fourth Beast Empire loses, Jesus Christ and his saints win. The second Esdras prophecy is complex and detailed. For this study, I've put together a list to help us keep track of all of its moving parts. Here is the list. As we walk through this list, remember that it is an introduction. Deep dive videos will be in the future, but today we're simply interested in establishing our sources and getting an introduction to the parts and pieces that make up the second Esdras prophecy. Let's begin by introducing 2nd Esdras chapters 11 through 13. By far the most prominent picture that comes away from this chapter is that of a three-headed eagle. It's documented in the first verse. Ezra is having a dream, and this is what he sees. On the second night I had a dream, and behold, there came up from the sea an eagle that had 12 feathered wings and 3 heads. We don't know what the eagle represents at this point, nor do we understand what the wings represent. In addition to these wings, however, there are additional wings, 8 little wings. It says in verse 11, "And I counted his opposing wings, or little wings, and behold, there were 8 of them." We're given a clue in the text, however, as to what these wings represent. Apparently they reign, so there's some rulers of some kind. We're not sure about the details at this point. However, these rulers, whatever they're doing, are ruling in the Fourth Beast Empire. We know that to be the case because when we get to the verses that start at verse 36, we see Jesus Christ coming out to reprove the Fourth Beast Empire. And he says very specifically, "The Most High says to you, are you not the one that remains of the 4 beasts, which I had made to reign in my world, so that the end of my times might come through them? You, the 4th that has come, have conquered all the beasts that have gone before." So Jesus Christ is telling us that he is reproving the Fourth Beast Empire. The Fourth Beast Empire apparently is represented by the three-headed eagle with 3 heads and 12 wings and 8 little wings. That's as much detail as we get with a brief introduction. Let's move on to chapter 12 now. It's a little bit confusing, but the first 2 paragraphs of content here are actually the finishing up of the prophecy from chapter 11. And the interpretation of the vision starts in verse 7. The interpretation of the vision goes down through verse 39, but after that, the text changes and is no longer dealing with the interpretation of the vision. Now let's finish up in chapter 13. The big picture in this chapter is that the Fourth Beast Empire is going through death throes. It's trying to defeat Jesus the Christ, but he burns them up with the breath of his mouth and saves his people. There is a portion where there's a vision, and then there's an interpretation of the vision. So it follows a pattern that we got in chapters 11 and 12 with a vision and an interpretation of a vision. This is a separate vision which deals basically with the end of the Fourth Beast Empire and the triumph of Jesus Christ and his people. Let's go back to the list now. In the second line of the list, we deal with Revelation chapters 19, 20, and 21. So here's Revelation chapter 19. One of the important takeaways from chapter 19 is that the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire, and that Jesus Christ is said to rule the nations to come with a fist of iron. In chapter 20, the 1,000-year kingdom is documented, where Jesus Christ rules and reigns with his resurrected saints, and Satan is thrown into the pit to be bound over for 1,000 years. A very important portion of this chapter deals with what happens to Satan after the 1,000 years. It says in verse 7, "And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be loosed from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations." When that's done, we see that the dead are judged. And that brings us to the end of that chapter. Chapter 21 goes on to describe the new heaven and the new earth. And so therefore, at this point, we are without Satan, and Jesus Christ is ruling and reigning in heaven and on earth. Again, to the list, this time the third line, we introduce Daniel chapters 7 and 12. So here's Daniel. In chapter 7, there are two important takeaways that help us with timing. In 7:25, there's a portion of the prophecy here that says, "He shall speak with words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times in the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, 2 times, and a half a time." That would be a total of 3.5 years. In addition to that, there's another timing element in Daniel, back in chapter 7, chapter 7, verse 12. In chapter 7, verse 12, it says, "After the defeat of the fourth beast empire, after the defeat of the beasts, as for the rest of the beasts, the dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time." So we know that this is referring to a time when the fourth beast empire is done, but it seems that there's a season and a time that follows that. We don't know at this point exactly how those things are used, but it turns out that they'll be important for putting together a timeline later on. And finally, let's go back to the list. And we're all done with our scriptural references. The next thing is to introduce Dana Coverstone. It seems to me that there are certain things that we can take away from 2nd Esdras, chapters 11 through 13. There are some events that fill in gaps from chapters 19 through 21 in the book of Revelation. Daniel introduces some timing elements, and I didn't mention this, but in chapter 12, verse 12, there's a reference to 1,335 days, so that's an additional timing element from Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 12. We're interested in looking at Dana Coverstone now. Dana Coverstone is documented here. I just did a quick search. I said Dana Coverstone Church. Turns out that he's a pastor at Burkesville, Kentucky, Living Word Ministries. But one of the things that we may find interesting is that he's also been the receiver of dreams and visions, which he's published on YouTube. So here's his YouTube channel, which lists many dreams that he's had and that he's documented. When I'm dealing with the information here with strictly scriptural content, there's only so detailed I can get with my focus for purposes of interpreting the scripture. But when we bring in Dana Coverstone's dreams, it gives us clues as to the more fine, detailed, up-close timing that would be associated with these prophecies. Move on now to introduce Esdras. Ezra has his own book in the Old Testament. Ezra is a priest scribe who helped the Jewish people get back together and restore the proper worship of God in the temple after the Babylonian captivity. He's also the one who was tasked with rewriting the scriptures that were burnt during the Babylonian captivity. So he's a big name in Hebrew history. The reason I bring him up here, though, is that his name is spelled Ezra in the Hebrew, but if we go back to look at the list, we see that I've put him together with Esdras here. Esdras is the Greek pronunciation of his name. So Ezra and Esdras are the same persons. Ezra is the book from the Old Testament, and Esdras is the book from the Apocrypha. If we look for Uriel in chapters 11, 12, and 13 of 2nd Esdras, we won't find him. But if we look in 2nd Esdras in earlier chapters, we do find him. So Uriel is the archangel. And finally, let's look at the rulers, events, durations, dreams, and dates. In this case, the rulers are taken from 2nd Esdras. The events are taken by combining them from Revelation and 2nd Esdras. The durations for these things, however, are listed in the book of Daniel in chapter 7, verse 25, 7, verse 12, and 12, verse 12. To actually apply those, however, we need more details. So the dreams of Pastor Dana Coverstone in this case are presented and cherry-picked for information as to how they can take the time markers that are in these dreams and apply them to the durations. And finally, that leads us, by putting those together with Coverstone's dreams and the timing in Daniel, to come up with dates for certain elements in the overall prophecy. It allows us to put together effectively a master list of this prophecy. And that brings us to the end of this study. Until we meet again in the next video, blessings to you and your loved ones.